I was a lawyer a long time ago, and decided that I was more interested in the art world and photography, and I went back and studied. And then I curated a few exhibitions at the same time as making 2 books that went with the exhibition. And I decided quite clearly in that period and through that experience that actually, especially in relation to photography, the relationship of the photograph to the page was much more exciting than the relationship of the photograph to the wall. And I continue to believe that. I've continued to believe that actually most photography should not be hung in the gallery space. It's not necessarily relevant that it should be in the gallery space behind glass in an oak frame or in whatever context. And I also realized that my feeling about the art market was quite specific. As a publisher, there is this notion of a process of democratizing, this was raised last night, the ideas of the author, making them available widely and making them accessible. It's about access. And again, that answers one of the questions about the digital, because it becomes about access. So that is the role that I play. And you know, to become a gallerist or a curator is much more refined, but you know, I feel that the engagement with audience in a much more democratic way is what excites me. One of the reasons I agreed to come and was very pleased when I was asked to come was the possibility of starting to engage with Latin American photography, because looking at the exhibition here, I can't identify something as being a particular style of photography that stands for a country, but I'm not sure that that's actually possible for a photographer to, you know, as Nelson and Canclini said last night, a photographer can't stand for a nation. It's not possible nowadays with the absorption of image tropes through the internet, generally through television, etc., for people to have a distinct eye in the way in which they represent their own countries. I think it becomes about subject. And I see that in the show here, which I think is incredibly well curated and shows me work that I've never encountered before. But I can see the styles and the influences and suggest where they might have come from, because in a sense, the history of art comes together through that form, and the camera as well is a very particular machine which facilitates the making of images in quite precise and limited ways in reality, none of which are particularly new. The notion that the tripod has stood in every single place that every photograph has been taken before runs through the history of photography. So it's not really about that. It becomes about subject and the story that people are telling, stories that people are trying to tell, and that's what I haven't encountered enough of, other than the typical Magnum style National Geographic story about Latin America, which has never interested me. And I understand, of course, that that's exactly what this is trying to get away from. Well, I think a starting point is the tablet computer, because that's what inspired people to realize that the nature of reading, that the future of reading is through screens. The difficulty with limiting it to tablets, despite the numbers which suggest that there are going to be an enormous number of tablets in all marketplaces around the world before long, is the fact that each of those tablets comes with what's called a walled garden. You have these. You have an oligopoly, which in the marketplace is controlled by a small number of major corporations. They manage the marketplace. You have Google, you have Samsung, you have Apple, etc. So for a publisher, for an author, for a content owner, the important thing is to get away from those platforms. And what I've spent 3 years working on is not making things that only fit with the tablet, because I think it's not about tablets, it's about screens. That's actually the issue. The future is in understanding the fact that audiences are willing to engage with the ideas through screens. So that's the starting point. People come to the digital space thinking things should be free or very, very cheap. And my feeling is that as content controllers, as a publisher, as working with authors, working with people who have ideas, it's really important to hold the line that price in the digital space should not be fundamentally discounted simply because it's in this digital space. Because often, a good example is a catalogue I did about South African photography with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The physical book was 350 pages. It cost $70 US dollars, typical price. The digital version that we built had 10 videos. It had audio interviews with all of the 12 artists. It had a floor plan with designed in relation, digital tour of the exhibition. It had all this additional material. And yet, when we tried to charge, in that case, $25 instead of $70, there was criticism about the fact that it was so cheap and it had all this extra information and content. So there is a disjuncture there at the moment with audiences being unwilling to spend so much on digital content as they are with the physical book. But I believe it's partly to do with just education and people learning that this is what they have to pay in order to do it, and the fact that devices like the cloud and things like that will start facilitating people having libraries in a different way, imagining them in a different way. My starting point is that my publishing is quite unlike most publishing because it's based almost entirely on taste. It's not just on what should work in the market. So it's entirely subjective. So I stand and fall by my decisions and my choices. But at the same time, I hate vanity publishing. I think the photography publishing world is full of far too much vanity publishing, whether it's financed by institutions or it's self-financed by photographers. And that's all fine. And I even have a problem with the self-publishing. I think it works in the notion of artist books as self-publishing. Yes, that works, but this idea that it's a marketplace is not really true. There's too much of it. There's no editorial determination. There's no real control over quality, etc. So you have this just big splurge of books, and in my opinion, so what? 20 years, I probably will be around, and I probably will still be doing what I'm doing. And I will certainly still be making paper books because I believe that they're fundamentally two different things, making something in a digital form and making something as a book. And I think one is a book and one is not a book. I think the naming is all wrong. So in 20 years' time, I hope that the digital form will have developed so much further that the possibilities and the audiences are fully engaged in the processes and the usage of that type of storytelling, both online and in other capsule forms that you can have in publishing. But I continue to believe that there will always be a paper form, a bookwork, which is quite different, which is this linear, haptic, physical object which you hold and which you engage with physically in a quite different way to the interconnected wireframe format of a digital exploration of content. And that's where the differences are. But I believe that there's a lot to be done in the digital space, which is what excites me about it. But I also believe that paper will persist and that we'll continue to have strong ideas. I believe the photo book bubble will burst, that's for sure, within 20 years. But I do think that there will continue to be great photo book publishing that will exist and make a market for itself as it has done in recent times.